rock and roll. So the first question I have regarding surviving the worst storms is, obviously you're focusing on the former children soldiers in Uganda. What were some of the experiences that they'd been through that you encountered?
Why the book was written was because the experiences that these kids had gone through were so devastating that it makes a person who's foreign to their experience ask, how on earth did you survive that sort of thing? How did you survive it emotionally, spiritually? Some of them didn't survive it very well physically. I met a child, for example, who had all of his digits were cut off. So he just had stumpy hands. And there are hundreds and hundreds of children like this. They've had their lips cut off with a razor blade. They've had their ears cut off with a razor blade. Had the soft tissue of their nose cut off with a razor blade. Now, one fellow, for example, he said, before my parents were killed in front of me, the bush soldiers wanted to show them how they'd mutilated me. And so they held the parents there in their little hut up near in the north of Uganda, and near Crickett, and they then systematically took off each of his fingers, his nose, his ears, and his upper lip. Then they clubbed to death his mother, and they shot his father. Now, this is just one child. They left the boy to live. Now, that was a little over 2 years ago. You ask that young man, you know, that teenager, he's still now only about 16, 17. You ask that young man, what happened for you to be able to get through that kind of a crisis? Because we don't have our body maimed like that unless we become ill or we're in a car wreck or something, or you know, we've gone to war and come back maimed in some way like that. But generally the average person will look at them and say, well, I can't see any value in that for me. But the kinds of experiences that they have are actually very similar to us. For example, the kids, first of all, get stolen from their schools, from their churches, from their parents, from walking along a bush road. There's a road near Gulu in North Uganda that if you, a couple of the people in that area were telling me, if you walk past this tree, you would never be seen of again, because the bush soldiers had their hideout, had their camp down over the horizon along that path, but they would simply jump out of the tall grass and grab you and capture you, take you away to be a soldier. The chances of you surviving being a soldier were, you know, pretty slim. You would be killed in just the training. Every child had to kill one of their loved ones or one of their friends or one of their relatives within the first week. Had to, in order to start the breaking process whereby they were made no good for society. And in order to make them
totally dehumanised.
Totally dehumanise them and put them under the spell of Joseph Kony and his pseudo-prophetic way of running an army. And so they had to become disempowered from their association with their family, disempowered from love, disempowered from friendships. They were not allowed to fraternise with each other, for example. So there's this deeply traumatic disengagement from normal life. I got to say that country people experience something of that when they move to the city to get a job as a kid. There's the same disenfranchisement.
Disconnect.
Yeah. There's a social.
Nowhere near as extreme.
It's not as extreme. No, not as extreme. It's not as violent, but the violence is still there. The same thing if a couple divorce. What happens to the husband? What happens to the wife when they go and make their own way? There are these deeply traumatic realities that affect us. Yeah. And we see them so clearly portrayed in the lives of these children.
What special needs do these kids have? What stands out that's special or distinctive about them?
They have.
I mean, obviously they're totally destroyed with any value.
Some of them that are totally destroyed appear to be unrecoverable. They're too broken, and these are children. These are These are children from the age of 10 to 16, 18. They are so broken, so brutalised, that they will stay in the bush fighting, or they simply are no longer functional. I gave a couple of coins to a beggar who was possibly 14 years old and quite crazy, just mentally completely broken. And so there are different needs depending on, has the person become irrecoverable? Has the person become so broken that you've got no starting place to mend them? And you think, oh, that's impossible. But when you meet some of these, you realise there's nothing that you won't get that child to stay around long enough to experience the healing process, the mending process. So you've lost the child. If the child will stay, then God does a work, people do a work, the community does a work, food does a work, opportunity does a work. There's all these healings.
Okay, in these circumstances, what was it then that you actually brought to meet that need?
I went to these young ones with an idea for two things. I wanted to give them some trauma relief, and I wanted to give them something of a renewal in their spirit from Christ.
Were they open to that?
Those that I approached were. And those that I approached on that basis, I said to them, if this works for you, then bring your friends. And they did.
Okay, so well, that's reasonably enough testimony that they had, what you were doing was having an impact for the better.
Yeah. And if you're working in this field, if you're a therapist or if you're a Holy Ghost worker and you're working in this field, you get a subjective sense that what you're doing is true and real and it's having its impact, and the Lord can give you a certain kind of prognosis on where you think what you've done is going to go to.
Right.
Is it what have you got to build on after what you've done? But you still need that coming back and that confirmation and that feedback. And someone bringing their friend saying, well, this worked for me and my friend is crying out for help and he wants it too.